Hi, this is Bill Geswich, and I'd like to talk to you today about Blazor Forms with Validation Part 4. The agenda for today will be a radio button in a Blazor form, a checkbox in a Blazor form, and a select or drop down in a Blazor form. Now this will be the last in the series relative to Blazor Forms with Validation, and in the next series I'm going to start talking to you about Blazor architecture. I've been doing things fairly quickly to get some concepts across, but I really want to talk about the overall architecture of a Blazor application before we get too far down the path, because I don't want you making early mistakes that you're going to have to go and refactor later on. So we'll talk about that later, but just giving you a little teaser for the upcoming video series. Here we are in Visual Studio. The first thing we want to do is define within the person DTO the fields that we're going to collect based on the new input types. The first, we're going to collect gender. That'll be a string. Now in production we'd want to make this an enumerated type or some other type that has a little bit better typing, but for now we're just going to use a string. We're going to set that equal to an empty string. Next, we're going to use the checkbox to determine whether you have pets or not, and we'll initially set that to false. And then finally, we'll use the select statement to determine the pet type that we have, and we're going to set that initially to an empty string as well. So let's go over to the person component, and let's start taking a look first at the radio button. So I've added the code here just to make it easy so that you don't have to watch me type. I've added this code here. So let's take a look at what it does. The first thing we do is we just set a label that says we're going to ask for the gender. The next is we're going to have a radio button, ID of female, to align to the label related to it. So this is going to be a radio button, so it's an input statement of type radio. Now a radio does not have an input radio Blazor component, so we have to use the regular input component or input element. Type radio, ID of female, which aligns to the label. The value here will be female. We've got an @change we'll come back and look at, and it'll be checked if myPerson.gender is equal to female. So what we had defined in the DTO, that's what we're checking here. The male looks very similar, except that it's looking for male. So now let's talk about gender changed. On change, we're going to call gender changed. Well, where is that? Well, gender changed happens to be down here, and it's a method that I've defined. It accepts parameters of change of n-args, and then you get to the value of the radio button. So args.value will be the value. So if we go back up here, the value is either female or male, and then we convert that to a string just in case it's an integer or something else, and we put that in myPerson.gender. So essentially what's going on here is when you click on female, gender change gets called, and myPerson.gender gets set to female, and then this gets set to true, and it'll be checked. Also, if myPerson.gender is not equal to an empty string, we print out a label to the screen that says myPerson.gender, so male or female, activities. Just something that shows us that it's working. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. We go to the person component. Here we have the gender, male, female, or female, male. And since it was a empty string, nothing is selected. But as soon as I select one of them, female, female activities, select the other one, male activities, and there you have it. And there's the radio button. So now the next thing I want to take a look at is let's look at what a checkbox looks like. Now fortunately, the checkbox has a input checkbox. So it's going to be very similar to what we've already shown you before in other videos. And I'm going to copy in the code for that. So let's go ahead and close this and close this just to get rid of some of that detail. And let me copy in this code. So the first thing we have here is a label for equals pet owned. That's associated with the checkbox of pet owned. And do you have pets? Next, we have an input checkbox, ID of pet owned, and a bind value of my person.hasPets. So that's associated with the person DTO field that we set up here. Let's go back to the person component. And then we have an if myperson.hasPets. So if it's true, we're going to print this label that says you have pets. And if it's false, you're not going to see the label. So let's run this and see what happens. We'll go to the person component. We see, do you have pets? When I click that, the validation does run and check because a field was changed. And you notice you say you have pets. If I unclick it, you don't have pets. You have pets. So here you have the checkbox working. Now the final component that I'd like to talk about in this video is the select. And there is an input select. There's a couple of tricks relative to this, so I saved that for last. So let me pull in the code relative to the select. I will close the input checkbox and I will paste in this code. And here we have a select statement here, down here. And what we have is a couple of things. First, we have a label that says pet type associated with the input select. And let's talk about this. So we do have an input select here. And we're going to bind that value to myperson.petType. And then the options that we have are none, dog, cat, and other. So when we run this, you will see that dropdown. It's going to be bound to myperson.petType. Here's the dropdown, none, dog, and we actually have a dog myperson.petType. So what I'll do, let me add a label so we can see that, just to make sure that it's pet type. All right, we go to the person component, we choose dog, and you see dog right here. We choose cat, and you see cat. So it's definitely working. So now there are a couple of things that I wanted to talk about relative to select. The first thing is if I wanted to do something when you chose like dog, if I wanted to update something, I think about, well, I'll just do an on change and I'll make that equal to do something. And I will say, go down to the code section. The only reason I'm putting that there is because I want to put a breakpoint. So I'll put a breakpoint there. Let's run it. And then theoretically, whenever I select a new pet type, so let's go here to cat. Whoop, let's go to dog. Wait a minute, what's going on? The breakpoint is not being hit. What happens is on a select, it's never firing the on change is what's happening. Because bind value is two-way binding, anything that you want to do when the value changes, since you have something specified here, you really should do it within the get and set. And then you'd want to change the local variable. And so let me show you a couple of ways to do something when the value changes. The first is to just make this a regular input statement. And let's get rid of the on chain, the value, the binding, and we'll put this as an input, or I'm sorry, a select. Here we go. And we'll update this to an end select. And everything changes now when I run it. Go to the person component. Oh, we hit the breakpoint. Okay, so that's good. The pet type is still going to be empty because we haven't set it now. So that's one way you can call the do something routine. The other way is to do it by using a local variable. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so I've copied in the code. And let's take a look at what we're doing here. So the other way to do it is we can go back to using input select. We can bind value, but this is now going to be a local variable. And let's see what that does. So the local variable will be a property actually, and we'll do the getter, which is just returning my underscore my pet type here. And then for the setter, will say the my pet type is equal to the value that's being passed in. But it can also call do something. Now the do something that it calls is down here. And since it's no longer an event, we don't need the change event args. And so we can print to the console my pet type. So let's see if this breakpoint gets set. We go to the person component. Here is the pet type. Let's choose dog, and there we have it. So there are a couple of different ways that you can look at approaching the problem with a select. So we've covered the radio button, the checkbox, and the select statement. And that should wrap up the Blazor forms with validation. Please feel free to reach out to me with any comments or questions you may have. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.